The black Mercedes moved slowly down Willow Creek Lane like something that didn't belong there and knew it. It rolled past the corner grocery where Mr. Hutchins had been selling the same brand of coffee for 30 years, past the Delgado house where 3 generations lived under one roof, past the old maple tree that had survived every storm this neighborhood had ever endured, and it came to a quiet stop in front of a small 2-story home with a porch light that had been burned out for 2 weeks because the man inside hadn't found the energy to replace it yet. The houses on Willow Creek Lane were old and honest, their paint peeled in the corners, their mailboxes leaned, their front steps creaked in the same spot every single time, and the people who lived inside them knew exactly which step that was and stepped over it out of habit, the way you step around the broken parts of things you love. The people here worked double shifts and paid bills late and raised children in small rooms and never once asked anyone for sympathy because sympathy didn't pay the electric bill. So when that sleek black car stopped in front of Daniel Carter's house, every curtain on the block shifted. Every neighbor who had watched Daniel survive the last 6 years stood a little closer to their windows and waited. Daniel stood in his doorway holding a dish towel he had forgotten he was holding. He had been washing the same plate for 4 minutes without noticing. Behind him, his 8-year-old daughter Emma pressed her small face against his back and wrapped both arms around his waist and looked around him at the street, the way children look at things that feel important before they understand why. The woman who stepped out of the car wore a cream-colored blazer and carried nothing. No purse, no briefcase, no assistant, no armor of any kind. She stood beside the car for a long moment with her hands at her sides, and from where Daniel stood, she looked like a woman standing at the edge of something she was afraid to cross. Then she walked toward the house. He felt it before he could name it, that tightening in the chest that comes when the past you had been running from finally stops and turns around to face you. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Her hands trembled. She looked up at him, and her voice, when it came, was softer than he expected from someone who had arrived in a car like that. "My name is Olivia Bennett." The dish towel fell from Daniel's hand. He didn't notice. He knew that name the way a man knows the thing that took everything from him. He had spent 6 years trying not to say it out loud. Olivia held his gaze and swallowed hard. "My father died 2 months ago." She paused for a breath. "And I recently learned that he destroyed your life." The street went silent in the way that only happens when something true has been spoken in a place that has waited a long time to hear it. Emma whispered, "Dad?" He didn't answer. His eyes never left Olivia. "What do you want?" he asked, and his voice was quiet in the way that quiet is dangerous. Olivia looked down at the porch step between them, then back up. "My father left a debt behind." Daniel made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of pain that has been compressed into something small and hard over many years. "The Bennetts don't owe me money," he said. "No," Olivia said. "They owe you the truth." Daniel stared at her. Then he stepped outside and let the screen door close gently behind him, and Emma remained at the door watching with her small hands pressed against the screen. To understand what that name meant to Daniel Carter, you have to understand who Daniel Carter was before it took everything. He had grown up in Pittsburgh, the son of a steelworker who believed that a man's word was the only thing nobody could repossess. Daniel had carried that belief into every job site he ever walked. He became a construction safety inspector because he was the kind of man who needed to know that his work meant something beyond a paycheck. And there was nothing that meant more than knowing a father got home for dinner because Daniel had looked twice at a bolt that wasn't sitting right. Companies competed to hire him. Workers trusted him the way you trust the person who checks your parachute. Younger inspectors followed him around sites asking questions, and Daniel always stopped to answer them, crouching down beside whatever problem they were looking at and walking them through it slowly, because he understood that knowledge given freely was the only kind that actually saved lives. He had Sarah at home, his wife of 11 years, the woman who made the whole house smell like coffee and cinnamon on Saturday mornings, who sang off-key to the radio while she cooked and didn't care even slightly that she was off-key, who left little notes tucked inside Daniel's work boots when she knew he had a hard day ahead of him. Notes that said things like, "You are the best man I know," or "Come home safe," or sometimes just a small drawing of a star because she knew he would understand what it meant. They had Emma, who was 2 years old then and learning to walk and falling down and laughing every time she fell, as if falling was simply part of the adventure. Daniel's life was not grand, but it was full, and he understood even then that fullness is its own kind of wealth. Then came the Allegheny Crossing project, a billion-dollar bridge contract owned by Bennett Development Group, the largest assignment of Daniel's career and the one that was supposed to carry his family into a more comfortable future. He walked onto that job site the first morning with his clipboard and his coffee and the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. 3 months later, he found the defects. Severe structural weaknesses in several critical support sections, the kind that don't announce themselves loudly, but sit quietly inside the steel, waiting for the wrong moment. Daniel documented everything with the careful precision of a man who understood that every number he wrote down was someone's life. Photographs, measurements, engineering notes, formal written reports with detailed recommendations. He walked them personally to the project office and submitted them through every proper channel available to him and formally demanded that construction stop immediately. The executives smiled in meetings. They promised reviews. They talked about timelines and investor commitments and the cost of delays. Construction continued. 14 days later, on a Tuesday morning in October, a major scaffold collapsed. Daniel heard about it on the radio driving to a different site. He had to pull his truck over. He sat on the side of the road with his hands on the steering wheel and his eyes closed, and he felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with his body. Workers were injured, men who had wives and children and Saturday morning routines of their own. Millions in damage spread across a site that Daniel had warned them about in writing. He drove straight to the site. He stood at the barrier and looked at the wreckage and felt the specific grief of a man who told the truth and was not believed in time. When the investigators arrived, Daniel was ready. Every document, every photograph, every report. He carried them in a folder he had kept locked in his truck. The investigators took the folder. Then the official record showed that Daniel Carter had failed to identify the structural concerns at all. His reports did not exist. His warnings had never been filed. The man who had documented everything had become, on paper, the man who had missed everything. Within days, he was the story. Within weeks, he was unemployed. Within months, every door in his industry had closed, quietly and completely, the way powerful people close doors when they don't want the sound to carry. The day Daniel cleaned out his office, he called Sarah from the parking lot. He sat in his truck and told her everything, and she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Come home. Just come home right now." He drove home and she met him at the door and held him without saying anything else, and that was the right thing to do, and she knew it. Sarah had been managing her autoimmune condition for years with a combination of medications that were expensive and absolutely necessary. Losing Daniel's insurance didn't feel catastrophic at first. They told each other it would be temporary. They sold the second car, then Daniel's truck, and borrowed his brother's. Then Sarah's grandmother's ring, which had been in her family for 40 years. She packed it into a small box one evening and handed it to Daniel without ceremony, and only asked him quietly not to watch while she did it. He watched anyway from the hallway, and he never forgave himself for not finding another way.
They cut everything unnecessary, and still the numbers didn't work. Sarah began stretching her medication without telling him, halving doses, skipping treatments on the weeks when the bills were worst. She told Daniel she was feeling better than she had in years, and she said it with such warmth in her eyes that part of him held onto it like a life ring. He found her one night at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with the lights off and one hand pressed to her side, breathing in the careful, controlled way of someone managing pain. She heard him in the doorway and turned and smiled immediately, a full, warm smile, as if she had simply gotten up for a glass of water. He stood there looking at her and loved her so completely and so helplessly that he felt it physically, like pressure behind the sternum, like something he could not put down and could not carry either. A few months before, she died. He woke at 3 in the morning to find her side of the bed empty. He found her sitting on the edge of Emma's bed in the dark, not touching anything, just watching their daughter sleep. Daniel leaned in the doorway and said her name softly. Sarah didn't turn around. Her voice was very quiet and very steady. "I'm trying to memorize her," she said. Daniel said nothing. There was nothing to say. He went and sat beside her on the edge of the bed, and they stayed there together in the dark, while Emma slept, and outside the window, the neighborhood was completely still. 14 months after he lost his job, Sarah died on a Thursday afternoon in March, while the trees outside the hospital window were just beginning to think about spring. Emma was asleep in the chair beside the bed, one small hand tucked under her cheek. The last thing Sarah said was barely above a whisper. She found Daniel's hand and held it, and turned her eyes toward Emma in the chair and said, "Promise me she'll still believe people are good." 3 days later, she was gone. Daniel had not broken that promise, not for a single day. Now Olivia stood at the bottom of his porch steps and told him what she had found. Her father's safe, the folder, Daniel's original reports, every page intact, the ink still clear and sharp after 6 years, the independent engineering assessments that confirmed everything he had documented. And at the bottom of the folder, a handwritten note in her father's own handwriting, signed and dated, 3 sentences that proved beyond any question that Richard Bennett had understood the danger, had read Daniel's warnings, and had chosen the project schedule over the lives of the workers on that site. Olivia's voice broke on the word signed. She pressed her lips together and steadied herself. "I spent 2 weeks trying to convince myself the dates were wrong," she said. "I hired 2 separate forensic document experts." She looked at Daniel directly. Everything was real. Daniel stood very still. Something moved through him that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 6 years, a slow, rising heat that started in his chest and moved into his hands. "Do you understand?" he said, and his voice was low and careful, the way a man's voice gets when he is holding something back with everything he has. "What it cost. Do you understand what was taken?" Olivia did not look away. "No," she said, honestly, "not completely, but I'm here because I need to try." For a long moment, Daniel stood there on his porch, with 6 years of grief and fury and exhausted dignity pressing against the inside of his ribs, and he breathed through it slowly, the way Sarah had taught him to breathe through the hard moments. In through the nose and out slow, and let it move through you instead of staying inside you. Then Olivia opened the screen door. She walked carefully, carrying a glass of water with both hands, her tongue pressed to her upper lip in concentration, the way she carried anything important. She descended 1 step and held the glass out to Olivia. Olivia took it. "Thank you," she said softly. Emma looked up at her with the steady, serious eyes of a child who has learned to read adults very carefully. "Did your dad know my mom?" she asked. The question arrived like something that had been traveling a long distance to get there. Olivia looked at this small girl in her purple sneakers, holding a now empty glass. This child who had lost her mother at the age of 2 and had grown up watching her father fight a war nobody believed he was fighting. And for the first time since opening that folder, the full weight of it arrived inside Olivia completely and without mercy. Her father had never known Sarah's name, had never seen the kitchen table in the dark, or the ring packed into the box, or the chair beside the hospital bed, had never known that a little girl existed who was memorizing her mother before she was old enough to understand why. And yet, one decision made in a boardroom had reached all the way down into this quiet street and taken a mother away from her child. Olivia could not speak. Emma waited, patient and still. Then Olivia whispered, "No." Emma nodded slowly. Then she said, in a voice without anger, without bitterness, with only the simple gravity of a child speaking a true thing, "Then he should have." Olivia cried, walking back to her car. She sat inside for a long time with her hands in her lap before she could make herself drive away. She came back, not once, not twice, but again and again over the weeks that followed, without lawyers, without cameras, without any of the machinery of power her father had left her. She came the way you come when you owe someone something that has no number attached to it. Daniel talked, slowly at first, then more. He told her about the morning he realized the documents were gone, about calling the regulatory office and being told there was no record of his submission, about sitting in his truck in a parking lot and understanding for the first time that the ground had shifted completely beneath him. Olivia carried every word back into the boardrooms and conference rooms and legal offices that her father's name still opened. The fight was long and expensive and ugly in the way that fights for the truth usually are. Executives threatened her position, investors questioned her judgment, board members told her she was destroying her inheritance over a dead man's conscience and a stranger's grudge. There were nights when she sat alone in her father's office with the folder open on the desk, and she thought seriously about stopping. Then she would think about Emma on that porch step, carrying water to someone connected to everything that had hurt her, asking a question with no anger in her
voice, and she would close the folder and go to sleep and wake up and keep going. The investigation was formally reopened 8 months after Olivia first walked down Willow Creek Lane. Engineers reviewed the original documents. Forensic experts confirmed the dates and signatures. The official record was corrected publicly and completely, and the correction carried Daniel Carter's name in full and without qualification. The city issued a formal written apology. His licenses were restored. The industry that had quietly closed its doors remembered how to open them. On a morning in early April, Daniel stood beside Sarah's grave while the oak trees overhead were filling in with the first soft green of the season. He held the official documents in both hands. Olivia stood a few steps behind him, quiet. Daniel looked at Sarah's name in the stone for a long time. He looked at the dates. He looked at the papers in his hands. He looked back at her name. Tears moved down his face, and he let them. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I did it, Sarah," he said. "I finally proved it." The wind moved through the cemetery and stirred the new leaves gently overhead, and the world in that moment felt extraordinarily quiet and extraordinarily kind, the way the world sometimes feels after something that needed to be right has finally become right. He stood there a long time. He folded the papers carefully and placed them inside his jacket against his chest. He touched the top of the headstone once, gently, the way you touch something precious. Then he straightened and breathed and turned back toward the living. Weeks later, a reporter asked Emma how it felt knowing that everyone now believed her father. Emma thought about it, the way she thought about everything, completely and without hurry. Then she smiled. "I already believed him," she said. The reporter leaned forward.
even when no one else did? Emma nodded, as if this required no courage at all. Good people don't stop being good just because somebody lies about them. The reporter looked down at her notepad and could not write anything for a moment. Daniel sat beside his daughter and felt something loosen in his chest that had been wound tight for 6 years, some last remaining knot of grief and anger and exhausted hope finally releasing all at once, because Emma was right, in the way that children are sometimes right when they cut straight through every complicated layer adults have built around a truth and arrive at the quiet center of it. Good people do not stop being good. Truth does not stop being true. And sometimes the debt left behind by a corrupt man is paid not by lawyers or courts or public apologies, but by the courage of one woman who walked down a street where she didn't belong and knocked on a door she was afraid to knock on, and in doing so, gave a little girl back a father whose name was clean again, and gave a man back the one thing Sarah had always deserved to know, that he had never stopped fighting, that the truth had always been there, that it had simply been waiting, the way truth always waits, for someone honest enough to carry it into the light. If this story moved something in your heart, if it reminded you that integrity is worth every cost, and that courage lives in the quietest people on the quietest streets, then you are exactly where
you belong. This is the Kind Souls Stories. Subscribe right now and stay close, because every single week we bring you another story of real human courage, of families who held on through the dark, and of the kind of goodness that never makes headlines but changes lives forever. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that good people still exist, because they do, they always have, and they always will. The significant educational and human value in this story rests in truths that matter across every generation. It teaches that one person's moral courage can correct what an entire system chose to hide. It shows that integrity means continuing to tell the truth, even when the truth costs everything and no one is listening. It illustrates through Sarah's life and death the real and devastating human cost of corporate dishonesty, not as an abstract concept, but as a mother lost, a childhood altered, and a man's years stolen. It honors the quiet dignity of ordinary people who carry impossible weight without asking for recognition. It teaches children, through Emma, that faith in a good person is not naive. It is the most precise and accurate thing a loving heart can know. And it reminds every viewer that truth, no matter how long it is buried, does not die. It waits, and eventually, through the hands of someone willing to carry it, it finds its way home.